let me start with this. We don't control the Venezuelan oil industry, right? We don't. I get that it's a theoretical exercise. That people are saying, "Oh, look at the reserves, and now we have this." We don't have this. We've
Right.
captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife, but that regime, it wasn't just Nicolas Maduro, right? So they've already named a new president who, in fact, Delcy Rodriguez basically was the vice president and de facto oil minister. Her brother runs propaganda for the state. All the key players are still there, right? And so it's not as if we remove Nicolas Maduro and suddenly Edmundo Gonzalez of the opposition, who won the election legitimately, the entire international community basically agrees with that Maduro stole that election from the opposition. But it's not as if Edmundo Gonzalez suddenly is now sitting, in the presidential, seat along with Maria
Right.
Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize as a member of the opposition just recently. That's not the case, right? You've got the former vice president under Maduro now sitting as the president. You've still got the defense minister Vladimir Bedrino, who's a hardliner. You've got Diosdado Cabello, who essentially is the chief thug in the regime under Maduro, and was probably going to take over from Maduro if there had been a natural, handover of power from him to would have gone to Cabello. Um, you've got all these senior military officers and security apparatus personnel who have benefited financially over the years by working within that Maduro regime, which had always, benefited from its relationships with narco traffickers. So people shouldn't imagine somehow that, when the White House says we're going to run Venezuela, I'm not quite sure what that means at this stage. And I don't think anybody does really, because we don't know what's going to
Right.
backfill this whole thing. Have they had, as the White House, had backroom discussions with Delcy Rodriguez and others, Cabello and these other cats that are in charge at this point? Have they cut a deal with them? Well, we don't know. Are they intending, is the White House intending to just say, okay, we can probably work with these folks because look, now they're scared because look what we did to Maduro. So they're going to get in line and work with the
Right.
U.S. Is that what they're thinking? Are they thinking that they're going to have a transition of power to the Democratic opposition like Gonzalez and Machado? Because have they had those discussions? There's a lot to clean up here, as always, when go down the road of regime change. So I think that's the first thing that I'd want to mention. Um, other than that, look, this started out as a narco trafficking exercise, right? A counter narcotics operation.
Right.
That's how this whole thing got pitched at the very beginning, as we started to put some assets into the Caribbean, started targeting, drug boats and saying, okay, this is a counter narcotics operation. That was fairly clear if you're saying, what are we doing there? Then we had this massive
Uh-huh.
buildup, right? We put the Gerald Ford out there, the Iwo Jima. We put a lot of resources out there that didn't seem to add up to a counter narcotics operation. It was outsized in terms of the deployment. So that then
Right.
became, okay, what is it exactly? What's our objective? And then President Trump himself came out on social media not that long ago and said, hey, we're not easing up on pressure until you give us back the oil and land that you stole. So then that kind of cleared it up, and they said that part out loud. People have been saying behind the scenes, a lot of the non-interventionists, isolationists, they've been saying, oh, this is just about oil. And they've been saying that, and people have been saying, well, no, it's a counter narcotics, operation, although it does seem as if we're looking to
Uh-huh.
push Maduro out. But then Trump kind of said
Right.
that part out loud, and it became clear that, well, this is a play to create some element within the Venezuelan government that will work with the U.S. To the benefit of the U.S.
Hey, ladies, it's Jillian here, and let's just say that when it comes to intimate wear, the struggle is real. For many of us, bras and underwear are just afterthoughts, basic, uncomfortable, and honestly, underwhelming. And for years, I'd focus on my outfits, thinking the right top or the right pants would make me feel great, but Skims has flipped that script. Now, the foundation pieces I put on first set the tone for my wardrobe. confidence and comfort all day long. The Fits Everybody Scoop bralette is just what it says. It fits every body type, and it's a game changer. It's supportive, it's comfortable, and even if you have a bigger bust, which I unfortunately do not, but even if you do, it feels like a perfect fit, not a constricting sports bra. Skims is just designed differently. Quality fabrics, quality construction, soft and seamless support. You feel secure, lifted, and still totally natural. No digging, no adjusting. Skims is now just a wardrobe essential for me, and I'm sure it will be for you too. So you can shop my favorite bras and underwear at skims.com/Jillian. And after you place your order, please be sure to let them know that we sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. When you mentioned that Trump said the land and the oil that Venezuela stole from who? Us? How does that make any sense? What am I not putting together? Did we have a stake in Venezuela before Chavez or something?
Yes, yeah, we did. And look, for the most part, companies like Chevron had been, big players in the Venezuelan oil industry prior to Chavez. Chavez nationalized the economy essentially, and took not just from the U.S. but from sort of the key families of Venezuela, kind of nationalized all of their property and assets. And so I assume that's what the White House has been talking about. They want to go back to a situation where the resources, and they are vast, right? The Venezuelan oil resources, mineral resources, someone should take a look at how much gold sits in Venezuela. It's ridiculous compared to the world's gold holdings. And so, that I get that. You want it's there's so much here, right? People are kind of divided within the, I guess, what do you want to call it, the MAGA camp. There's those that think, this sounds great, and then there's those that say, I can't believe we're doing this. I thought it was America first. Well, you could parse this, I suppose, and say, well, it's kind of America first because what the White House, I think, is saying is we want friendly neighbors, right? We want to go back to this idea that, the Monroe Doctrine, and then expanded by Teddy Roosevelt, that foreign countries, particularly those not with our best interests at heart, can't play in our neighborhood. And so I get that. My biggest concern here is that, having been around a long time and having seen these things fairly close up, again, regime change can get really, really messy.
Everyone is referencing how ecstatic the Venezuelans are.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to admit, I also remember when the Iraqis were ecstatic in pulling down the statue of Saddam, right? And same thing with Libya and Gaddafi. Same thing happened with Noriega. And the people are overjoyed right up until we're in a 20-year conflict and they hate us. It's costing trillions and we're losing lives. Now, I obviously want to give Trump credit. We didn't lose one life in the capture of this guy. That's incredible. And I want to ask you about that, because if anybody will understand how they did it, it will be you. But if the people you mentioned that are still in power don't play ball, then do you have an occupation? Is this the same thing? A 20-year occupation that goes nowhere?
No, I don't think you have an occupation, but I think you have just a reshuffling of people who have, enriched themselves through narco trafficking. You've got a bunch of corrupt individuals who have benefited from dealing with Maduro. So at the end of the day, if what you're saying is we wanted to create a democratic, stable country, then just reshuffling the power players there doesn't really give you that. And it also kind of, then you think, oh, well, okay, what was that all about? Because if they don't play ball, then, as you pointed out, and work with us in terms of the oil and the other resources, then what have you got, right? And how are you just pushing aside the opposition and saying, well, getting Gonzalez back in there and doing the will of the people based on that last election? They, conservative estimates had the opposition winning by some 3-1 margin. But if you just push the opposition aside right now and say, we'll we'll try to get you in there later, because right now it just seems too difficult. You know what? That also, I think there's a credibility issue here, and in terms of what the point was. So I again, all these things can be true. Conflicting ideas can be true. Maduro is a terrible cat. He and Chavez ruined that country for millions and millions and millions of Venezuelans. That's why you see people out in the streets in Venezuela elated at the capture of Maduro. A country with the resources of Venezuela. It was the wealthiest nation in the region, right? And Maduro and then previously Chavez, through their policies and their corruption, their socialism, their mismanagement, they ruined that country, right? I've said it before, but only communists and socialists and just generally corrupt people could take a country with the resources of Venezuela and screw it up. So you can argue definitely that the Venezuelan people would be far better off going forward with a new government. And they actually wanted a new government. That's why they had that election that Maduro then stole. But you can also, at the same time, argue and agree that, this isn't as cut and dry.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And make sure to let me know what guests you want to see on in the future.